Captain Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched the alien cargo handlers move boxes from his ship. The Vorthak workers were twice his size, with thick gray skin, and 4 arms that could lift things no human could manage, alone. They moved slowly and looked at Jake like he was some kind of pet. "Another load of Earth wheat, human?" asked Supervisor Krell, his voice deep and rumbling. The massive alien barely looked at Jake when he spoke. "Yes, sir. Finest quality." "From the farming colonies," Jake replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He had learned long ago to stay polite with the Vorthak. They controlled most of the trade routes in this sector, and humans needed their business. Jake's ship, the Horizon's Edge, sat in the docking bay like a tired old dog among wolves. Compared to the sleek Vorthak warships and the gleaming Zalani, science vessels, his cargo hauler looked simple and weak. Paint peeled from its hull and its engines made odd noises that worried the crew. But it flew, and it carried goods from human space to alien worlds, and that was enough. Lisa Chang walked up the ramp carrying a datapad. She was Jake's pilot, a small woman with quick hands and sharper eyes. "The fuel cost went up again," she said quietly. "3rd time this month." Jake nodded. The aliens always found new ways to make humans pay more for everything. Fuel, docking fees, trade permits. They treated humans like children who should be grateful for any attention at all. "How much longer until we can leave?" Jake asked. "Bobby says the engine repairs will take 2 more hours. Amy is still arguing with the Port Authority about our next destination permit." Jake looked across the busy spaceport. Hundreds of ships from dozens of different species filled the massive station. Vorthak military vessels dominated the center docks, their dark hulls bristling with weapons. Zalani ships gleamed like silver, knives, their technology so advanced that humans could barely understand how it worked. The ancient Keth Mori sent ships that looked like floating crystals, beautiful and mysterious. And then there were the human ships. Old, patched, simple. Trading, vessels and passenger liners that looked like they might fall apart at any moment. The other species barely noticed them. Bobby Martinez emerged from the engine room, oil stains on his work clothes and a frustrated look on his face. "The power coupling is acting up again," he said. "I can fix it, but we need better parts." "Can't afford better parts," Jake replied. "Make do with what we have." Bobby shrugged. He was used to making miracles happen with spare parts and hope. All human engineers were. They had to be. Amy Watson jogged over from the customs office, her face red with anger. "They're making us pay extra fees for biological contamination." "Risk," she said. "Apparently our food shipments might carry dangerous Earth germs." Jake sighed. It was always something. The aliens found endless excuses to make human life difficult. They didn't trust humans, didn't respect them, and certainly didn't fear them. To the great powers of the galaxy, humans were useful but harmless. Good for carrying cargo and growing food, but not much else. "Sir," Lisa's voice was tight. "You need to see this." She handed him her communication device. The screen showed a news report from the Galactic Coalition Network. Jake read the headline and felt his blood turn cold. Vorthak Empire announces new expansion policy. Supreme Commander Thekvar declares intention to remove inefficient species from valuable systems. The report went on to explain that the Vorthak military was tired of dealing with what they called weak civilizations that took up space but contributed little to galactic progress. They wanted to streamline the coalition by removing species that couldn't defend themselves properly. Jake looked at his crew. Lisa's face was pale. Bobby had stopped working and was staring at the news report. Amy was reading over Jake's shoulder, her hands shaking slightly. "They can't be serious," Amy whispered. "The coalition won't let them just attack member species." But Jake knew better. The coalition was controlled by the strong. The Vorthak Empire had the biggest military. The Zalani Confederacy had the best technology. The Keth Mori were older than recorded history and commanded respect through mystery and power. Species like humans survived by being useful and staying out of the way. If the Vorthak decided humans were taking up too much space, who would stop them? "We need to get home," Jake said quietly. "Send word to all human ships in the area. Tell them to finish their business and head back to human space as soon as possible." "You think they'll really do it?" Lisa asked. Jake looked out at the Vorthak, warships in the docking bay. Each one could destroy a human colony without breaking a sweat. The aliens saw humans as weak farmers and merchants who posed no threat to anyone. They had no idea what humans were really capable of, because humans had spent 200 years making sure they never found out. But Jake remembered the stories his grandfather told him. Stories about the old days, before humans joined the galaxy. Stories about wars that burned entire continents and weapons that could crack planets. Stories about why humanity had chosen to put all of that away and become peaceful traders instead. The aliens thought humans were weak because humans wanted them to think that it was safer that way, safer for everyone. But if the Vorthak pushed too hard, if they actually attacked human colonies, then the safety would be over. The peaceful act would end. And the galaxy would discover what humans had been hiding for 2 centuries. Jake hoped it would never come to that. But deep in a sealed compartment in his ship's cargo hold, emergency protocols waited in a locked case. Protocols that hadn't been opened since his grandfather's time. He prayed they would stay, locked forever. The emergency alert woke Jake from a deep sleep. Red lights flashed in his small cabin as the ship's communication system screamed warnings at him. He rolled out of bed and ran to the bridge in his underwear, his heart pounding. Lisa was already at her station, her face white as paper. Amy sat at the communications console with tears streaming down her cheeks. Bobby had come up from the engine room and stood frozen in the doorway. "What's happening?" Jake demanded. "New Heaven," Amy whispered. "They hit New Heaven." Jake felt the world spin around him. New Heaven was one of the largest human colonies, home to 50,000 people. Farmers, teachers, children, old folks. Good people who had never hurt anyone. "Show me," he said. The main screen lit up with footage from the colony's emergency broadcasts. Jake watched in horror as massive Vorthak warships filled the sky above New Heaven's green fields. The ships were enormous, dark metal monsters that blocked out the sun. "This is Administrator Paul Henderson," a voice crackled over the communication system. "We are under attack. Repeat, New Heaven is under attack. The Vorthak fleet arrived without warning. They're not answering our calls. They're not asking for surrender. They're just..." The transmission cut to static. Then the screen showed what happened next. Beams of energy fell from the sky like deadly rain. Where they touched the ground, everything died. Buildings melted. Trees burst into flame. People running for safety simply disappeared in flashes of light. Jake watched his people die. He watched children trying to hide behind their parents. He watched farmers who had never held weapons attempting to fight back with farming tools. He watched an entire world burn. The bombardment lasted 3 hours. When it was over, New Heaven was gone. 50,000 human beings reduced to ash and radioactive dust. The Vorthak ships left without sending a single message. "Animals," Bobby whispered. "They're just animals." Jake couldn't speak. He stood on his bridge watching the dead world spin in space, its surface glowing with the heat of destruction. This wasn't war. This wasn't even conquest. This was murder. Amy's communication board lit up with incoming messages from across human space. Colony after colony reporting the same news. Fear in every voice. Panic spreading like wildfire. "All human. Ships are ordered to return to home ports immediately," came an official broadcast from Earth. "This is not a drill. All civilian vessels must return to human space at once." Jake walked to his private safe and entered a code he had memorized but never used. Inside was a sealed envelope marked with his grandfather's handwriting. "Open only if they draw first blood," it read. His hands shook as he tore it open. Inside was another code and simple instructions. "Enter this into the command console. Tell no one until it's done." Jake walked to the ship's main computer and typed in the numbers. The screen went black for a moment. Then new displays appeared. Systems he had never seen before came online. Hidden compartments throughout the ship unlocked with soft clicking sounds. "Captain," Lisa said, her voice strange. What's happening to our ship? The horizon's edge was changing. Panels slid away to reveal weapon ports. The cargo bay floor opened to show missile launchers. The simple merchant vessel was becoming something else entirely. Lisa, take us home. Maximum speed, Jake ordered. Sir, the engines can't handle maximum speed for long. They can now. Check your console. Lisa looked at her pilot controls and gasped. New systems had appeared. Engine readings showed power levels that should have been impossible. Captain, how is this? Later, Jake said. Just get us home. The ship jumped to faster-than-light speed with a smoothness that surprised everyone. The old tired engines that had struggled to reach normal speeds now pushed them through space like a bullet. During the journey home, Jake explored his transformed ship. Every section had hidden compartments filled with weapons, armor, and equipment he didn't recognize. The medical bay had surgical tools that looked more like torture devices. The communications array could now break through any encryption or jamming. Grandfather, what did you hide from us? He whispered. When they reached Earth orbit, Jake saw that every human ship in the system was going through the same transformation. Passenger liners sprouted weapon arrays. Cargo haulers revealed armor plating. Even small personal craft had hidden systems coming online. The orbital stations around Earth were changing too. What had looked like simple trading posts and factories were growing new structures. Weapon platforms, shield generators, and communication arrays that reached across the galaxy. Jake received orders to report to the Colonial Defense Headquarters. He had never heard of Colonial Defense Headquarters before today. The building was underground, deep beneath Earth's surface. Jake walked through corridors filled with people in military uniforms he didn't recognize. These were humans, but they moved differently than the merchants and farmers he knew. They walked like soldiers. President Helen Carter met him in a conference room filled with screens showing human colonies across the galaxy. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. But when she spoke, everyone listened. Gentlemen, ladies, she began. Today, the Vorthak Empire made the worst mistake in galactic history. They killed our children. They murdered innocents who never raised a hand against anyone. They drew first blood. She pressed a button and the screens changed to show military installations on dozens of human worlds. Installations that had been hidden for 2 centuries. For 200 years, we have pretended to be weak. We have acted like harmless farmers and traders. We let the aliens think we were no threat to anyone. We did this to keep the peace, to avoid the horrors we once knew. The screens showed weapons being brought out of storage, soldiers emerging from hidden bases, warships being built in factories that had pretended to make farming equipment. The peace is over, President Carter said. Activate the old protocols. Recall all military personnel from civilian positions. Begin full mobilization of all colonial defense forces. She looked directly at Jake. Captain Morrison, your ship will be retrofitted for combat operations. You and your crew will receive military training and assignments. The Horizon's Edge is now part of the human warfleet. Ma'am, Jake said, my crew are civilians. We don't know how to fight. President Carter smiled, but it was not a kind smile. Captain, your species conquered an entire planet before we learned to make fire. We fought wars that lasted centuries over patches of dirt. We built weapons that could end all life on Earth, then built more weapons just to be sure. She stood up and walked to a window that showed Earth's blue sky. We didn't forget how to fight, Captain. We just chose to stop. But they killed our children. They burned New Heaven. They wanted to see what humans do when pushed too far. She turned back to face the room full of officers. Now they're going to find out. 3 weeks after New Heaven burned, Lieutenant Colonel Danny Hayes crouched in the shadows of a Vorthak military base. His team of 12 soldiers waited behind him, their faces painted black and their weapons ready. They had been farmers and shopkeepers a month ago. Now they moved through the alien facility like death itself. Remember, Danny whispered into his communicator. No prisoners, no mercy. They showed none to our children. The Vorthak guards never saw them coming. Danny's team moved with a silence that surprised even him. They had trained for only 3 weeks, but the skills came naturally. like they had been sleeping inside every human waiting to wake up. The first guard died with Danny's knife in his throat. The alien was twice Danny's size and armed with an energy rifle, but he fell without making a sound. The second guard turned to investigate and found Lisa Chang behind him. She had been Jake Morrison's pilot. Now she was a killer. Within minutes, the entire base was theirs. 50 Vorthak soldiers dead. Not one human casualty. "Command, this is Strike Team Alpha," Danny reported. "Target neutralized. Moving to secondary objective." On the other side of the galaxy, Captain Jake Morrison watched his transformed ship cut through space toward another Vorthak position. The horizon's edge no longer looked like a cargo hauler. Armor plating covered its hull. Weapon arrays lined its sides. The engines that had once struggled now pushed the ship faster than most military vessels. "Target acquired," reported Lisa from the pilot's seat. She had stayed with Jake's crew, but now she wore a military uniform instead of civilian clothes. "Vorthak supply convoy, 3 ships. Bobby, weapon status?" Jake asked. "All systems green, Captain," Bobby replied from his new position at the weapons console. "Missiles loaded and ready." The Vorthak ships never had a chance to surrender. Jake's orders were clear. Show them the same mercy they showed New Heaven. The 3 enemy vessels disappeared in balls of fire and twisted metal. "Any survivors?" Jake asked. "Negative, sir," Amy reported from the communications station. "All contacts terminated." Jake felt nothing as he watched the debris drift past his view screen. A month ago he would have been sick at the thought of killing. Now it felt like justice. Across human space, similar scenes played out on dozens of worlds. The peaceful farming colony of Greenfield revealed underground bunkers filled with enough weapons to level continents. The quiet mining settlement on Titan Station brought out combat robots that had been disguised as industrial equipment. Every human colony had been a military base in hiding. Every human civilian had been a soldier waiting for orders. Dr. Rachel Stone stood before the Galactic Coalition Council on the neutral world of Harmony Station. She had been humanity's ambassador for 10 years, known for her gentle manner and patient diplomacy. The alien delegates remembered her as someone who always smiled and never raised her voice. Now she stood before them in a black military uniform, her face cold as winter. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice echoing in the great chamber. "You have asked why humanity has responded with such force to the Vorthak aggression. You call our actions extreme." The assembled aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Reports had been coming in for weeks. Human forces destroying Vorthak installations with ruthless efficiency. Human ships hunting enemy vessels like wolves. Human soldiers fighting with a brutality that shocked even hardened warriors. "Let me explain something about my species," Rachel continued. "For thousands of years we fought each other. We perfected the art of war through constant practice. We learned to kill with stones and sticks, then with metal and fire, then with energies that could crack planets." She pressed a button and the chamber's screens showed images from Earth's history. Ancient battles where thousands died in single days. Modern wars where entire cities vanished in nuclear fire. We became so good at killing that we nearly destroyed ourselves. So we made a choice. We put away our weapons. We became farmers and traders. We joined your coalition as peaceful members. The screens changed to show human colonies before the attack. Children playing in fields. Families sharing meals. Old people teaching young ones to grow crops. We spent 200 years learning to be gentle. Learning to build instead of destroy. Learning to love peace more than victory. Her voice grew colder. The Vorthak Empire looked at our peaceful nature and mistook it for weakness. They saw our restraint and thought it was fear. They murdered 50,000 innocent people to prove their strength. The screens now showed the destruction of New Heaven. Delegate after delegate looked away from the images of burning children and murdered families. "You want to know why we fight without honor? Why we show no mercy? Why we hunt Vorthak ships like animals?" Rachel's voice rose for the first time. "Because they forgot something important about humanity." She leaned forward, her eyes blazing. "We didn't choose peace because we were weak. We chose peace because we were too dangerous. We chose restraint because our alternative was the extinction of everything we fought. The chamber fell silent. The Vorthak wanted to see what humans do when pushed too far. They wanted to test our limits. They got their wish. Rachel turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at the terrified delegates. My government has authorized me to inform the Council that humanity will continue military operations until every Vorthak installation is destroyed and every Vorthak commander is dead. We will accept no surrender. We will show no mercy. We will remind the galaxy why Earth's history books are written in blood. She walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the dead silence. Any species that interferes with human operations will be considered hostile and dealt with accordingly. This is not a threat. This is a promise. As the chamber doors closed behind her, the alien delegates sat in stunned silence. They had spent centuries believing that humans were weak. Now, they realized the terrible truth. Humans weren't weak. They had just been sleeping. And now they were awake. Admiral Kate Morrison stood on the bridge of the human flagship Retribution and watched enemy ships burn in the darkness of space. She was Jake Morrison's sister, but where he had become a merchant captain, she had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. The Vorthak Empire's home fleet was dying in front of her, and she felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "Admiral, the enemy flagship is requesting permission to surrender," reported her communications officer. "Denied," Kate replied without hesitation. "Continue firing until they're all dead." The Retribution was not like the hidden warships that had emerged from human colonies. This vessel had been built in secret over decades, waiting for the day when humanity would need to show its true power. Its hull bore scars from ancient human wars. Weapons that had once been used to kill other humans now turned against aliens who had forgotten their place. "Ma'am, we're receiving surrender requests from 17 more enemy vessels," the officer reported. "You heard my orders," Kate said. "No prisoners, no surrender. They chose this when they murdered our children." The human fleet moved through Vorthak space like a plague. Every world they found was stripped of its defenses. Every ship they encountered was destroyed. Every military installation was reduced to smoking ruins. Major Chris Davis led his soldiers through the corridors of a Vorthak dreadnought that his team had just boarded. The massive alien warship had seemed invincible just hours ago. Now, it was a tomb. "Left corridor clear," reported Sergeant Mike Johnson over the radio. He had been a mechanic before the war started. Now he moved through enemy ships like he had been born to kill. "Right corridor secure," added Corporal Janet Lee. She had taught school children 3 months ago. Today she was hunting alien soldiers through their own ship. Chris found the bridge where the surviving Vorthak officers had barricaded themselves. They were huge creatures, each one capable of ripping a human apart with their bare hands. But they cowered behind their defenses like frightened children. "We surrender," their captain called out in broken human language. "Please, we surrender." Chris looked at the alien through his helmet display. He thought about the human children who had begged for mercy on New Heaven. Children who had received none. "No," he said simply, and gave the order to his team. When they were done, the dreadnought was silent. Back on Earth, engineer Tony Rodriguez worked around the clock in a facility that had not existed 6 months ago. The sign on the door said, "Agricultural Research Station." Inside, he was building weapons that would have terrified his ancestors. "The new missile design is ready for testing," Tony told his supervisor. "Range of 50 light years, planet killer. Warhead. Impossible to detect or intercept." "Good," replied Director Susan Walsh. She had been running a farm equipment company the year before. Now she oversaw the development of weapons that could end civilizations. "How many can we build?" "As many as you want," Tony said. "Every industrial facility in human space is working on military projects now. We can produce 1,000 of these missiles every day." Susan nodded. "Make it 2,000. We want to make sure the galaxy remembers this lesson." On the Vorthak homeworld of Keth Prime, Supreme Commander Thekavar watched his empire crumble. Reports came in every hour of another defeat, another world lost, another fleet destroyed. The humans were not just winning. They were erasing the Vorthak Empire from existence. "Sir," his aide reported. "We're receiving another message from the human admiral." "Put it through," Thekvar ordered. Admiral Kate Morrison's face appeared on the screen. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. That made her words even more terrifying. "Commander Thekvar, this is your final warning. You have 24 hours to evacuate all civilian populations from your remaining military worlds. After that, we will begin orbital bombardment. Any world that still contains Vorthak military forces will be sterilized." "You cannot do this," Thekvar protested. "There are innocent people on those worlds. Families. Children." Kate's expression did not change. "You should have thought of that before you murdered ours. 24 hours, Commander. Use them wisely." The transmission ended. Across the galaxy, other species watched in horror as humanity revealed its true nature. The Zalani Confederacy, with all their advanced technology, found their computers being invaded by human viruses that should not have been possible. The Kethmori, ancient and wise, discovered that humans had been studying their weaknesses for 2 centuries. President Helen Carter addressed the Galactic Coalition from her bunker deep beneath Earth's surface. She looked tired, older than her years, but her voice was steady. "To the members of the Coalition who have asked us to show mercy to our enemies, I say this. Where was your mercy when our children burned? Where was your outrage when New Heaven died? You sat in your safe worlds and did nothing while innocents were murdered." She paused, looking directly into the camera. "Humanity offered you peace for 200 years. We asked for nothing but to be left alone to grow our crops and raise our families. The Vorthak Empire decided that was not acceptable. They chose to test us." Behind her, screens showed human fleets moving through space, leaving destruction in their wake. Now they face the consequences of that choice, and so does anyone who stands with them. Captain Jake Morrison received his new orders as the horizon's edge approached another Vorthak stronghold. The planet below held 2 million civilians and 50,000 military personnel. "Sir," Lisa said from her pilot station. "Long range. Sensors show evacuation ships leaving the planet. Looks like they're abandoning the military installations." Jake nodded. "Good. When the last civilian transport clears orbit, we begin bombardment." "All of it, sir?" asked Bobby from weapons control. "All of it," Jake confirmed. "Leave nothing standing." Amy looked up from her communications station. "Captain, we're receiving a message from the planetary governor. He's asking us to spare the historical sites and cultural centers." Jake thought about the children's playground on New Heaven that had been turned to glass by Vorthak energy weapons. He thought about the school where young humans had been learning to read when the bombs fell. "Tell him no," Jake said. "Tell him to remember New Heaven." The bombardment lasted 6 hours. When it was over, the Vorthak military world was a dead rock floating in space. No buildings stood, no bases remained, nothing lived on its surface. Jake watched the destruction through his view screen and felt a grim satisfaction. The Vorthak had wanted to see what humans were capable of when pushed too far. Now they knew. The galaxy was learning that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers. It was their willingness to become monsters when necessary. Other species had evolved past their savage nature. Humans had simply chosen to control theirs. But when their children died, when their families burned, when their peaceful way of life was threatened, that control disappeared. And hell itself was unleashed among the stars. 6 months after New Heaven burned, Supreme Commander Thekvar knelt in chains aboard a human tribunal ship. The proud Vorthak leader who had ordered the death of 50,000 innocents now trembled before his captors. Around him, the last remnants of his once mighty empire waited for judgment. Admiral Kate Morrison sat at the head of the tribunal, her face carved from stone. Behind her stood Captain Jake Morrison and the other human officers who had brought the Vorthak Empire to its knees. The gentle merchants and farmers were gone, replaced by something harder and more dangerous. "Thekvar of the Vorthak Empire," Kate began, her voice echoing in the courtroom. "You stand accused of genocide against the human colony of New Heaven. How do you answer?" The massive alien raised his head, his 4 eyes filled with defeat. I answer that I was a fool. I thought your species was weak. I believed your peace came from cowardice. I was wrong. Yes, you were, Kate replied coldly. But being wrong does not excuse murder. Thekvar looked around the courtroom at the human faces staring at him. 6 months ago, these same humans had smiled at him in trade meetings. They had been polite and respectful, always willing to negotiate. Now they looked at him like he was already dead. What will you do with us? He asked. Kate stood up slowly. The same thing you did to our children. Nothing. The sentence was carried out that same day. Thekvar and his remaining officers were ejected into space without suits. The human fleet watched their former enemies die slowly in the cold vacuum, just as the people of New Heaven had died slowly under bombardment. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship and felt nothing as he watched. The gentle trader who had once worried about alien customs and trade permits was gone forever. In his place was someone who understood that peace could only exist when backed by the threat of overwhelming violence. Sir, Lisa reported from her station, we're receiving a message from the Galactic Coalition. They want to discuss terms. Jake smiled without humor. Tell them we'll meet at Harmony Station, and remind them that this time they come to us. The coalition delegates gathered at Harmony Station looked very different than they had 6 months earlier. Where once they had been confident rulers of the galaxy, now they seemed small and frightened. The Zilani Confederacy had lost 1/3 of their territory to human occupation. The Kethmori had watched their ancient wisdom prove useless against human brutality. Dr. Rachel Stone entered the conference chamber wearing the uniform of a human general. The gentle ambassador was gone, replaced by someone who spoke for the galaxy's new apex predators. The alien delegates flinched when she entered the room. Honored delegates, she began, and several aliens actually laughed at the formal address. I bring greetings from the Human Colonial Council and terms for the new galactic order. Terms? Asked the Zilani representative, his crystalline voice cracking with fear. What terms? Rachel pressed a button and the chamber's screens lit up. With star maps showing human-controlled territory. Red zones marked former Vorthak space, now empty and lifeless. Blue zones showed human colonies, stronger and more numerous than ever before. First, all former Vorthak territory is now under human administration. Any species that objects may discuss the matter with our fleet commanders. Several delegates started to protest, then remembered what had happened to the last species that challenged humanity. Second, all coalition species will contribute to a memorial fund for the victims of New Heaven. The amount has been calculated based on your failure to prevent genocide within coalition space. That's blackmail, whispered the Kethmori elder. No, Rachel replied calmly. That's the price of your cowardice. You could have stopped the Vorthak. You chose not to. Third, human ships will no longer disguise their true nature. Our warships will patrol coalition space to ensure that no species ever again mistakes our peaceful intentions for weakness. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted permanently. Humanity was no longer content to hide in the shadows. President Helen Carter addressed the galaxy from her new office on the former Vorthak homeworld. The planet had been renamed New Haven in honor of the murdered colony. Where once the Vorthak capital had stood, human monuments now rose into the sky. To the species of the galaxy, I offer a simple choice, she said, looking directly into the camera. Accept humanity as your protectors, or face us as your enemies. There is no middle ground. Behind her, construction crews worked to build new human settlements. Former Vorthak citizens, the few who had survived, worked alongside human colonists to rebuild their world. It was not cruel occupation, but it was absolute. We did not choose this role, Carter continued. We were content to be farmers and traders. But when innocents are murdered, when children burn, when genocide goes unpunished, someone must stand up and say no more. The camera panned across New Haven's new skyline, showing buildings that combined human practicality with alien architecture. It was beautiful in its own way, but everyone watching knew what it really represented. It was a warning written in stone and steel. On the agricultural world of Greenfield, Former teacher Janet Lee watched her students play in the schoolyard. Half of them were human children. The other half were young aliens from species that had submitted to human protection. They played together peacefully, laughing and learning under the watchful eyes of human soldiers. "Miss Lee," asked a young Zalani girl, "why do the human soldiers look so scary?" Janet knelt down to the child's level and smiled gently. "Because sometimes, little one, looking scary keeps bad people from hurting good people. The soldiers protect us so we can play and learn and grow up happy." The child nodded solemnly and ran back to play with her friends. Janet watched her go and thought about how different the galaxy had become. Children who might have grown up as enemies now played together as friends, united under human protection. Captain Jake Morrison stood in the cargo bay of his ship and looked at the new colonists preparing to depart for another world. Families with suitcases and dreams, teachers and doctors and farmers ready to build new lives. They looked like the same peaceful humans who had always traveled the galaxy, but now everyone knew the truth. These gentle colonists carried within them the genetic memory of humanity's violent past. Their cargo holds contained not just farming equipment and household goods, but weapons that could end civilizations. Their children would grow up learning both how to plant crops and how to fight wars. "Ready for departure, Captain," Lisa reported. Jake nodded and took one last look at the colonists. "Take us out, pilot. Let's go build a new world." As the ship jumped to hyperspace, Jake thought about his grandfather's stories. Stories about the old days when humans fought each other for patches of dirt and handfuls of resources. His grandfather had been right to hide those weapons, right to choose peace over war. But he had also been wise enough to know that peace only lasted when good people were willing to fight for it. The galaxy was safer now, protected by the knowledge that humanity watched over it. But every species slept a little less soundly, knowing that somewhere in the darkness of space the children of Earth patrolled the void. They were peaceful gardeners who remembered how to be gods of war, and the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had taught. The age of human dominance had begun.